There was once an empire that ruled the seas from the shadowy ports of Sumatra. An empire that welcomed pilgrims, protected trade routes, and whose name was once whispered in the same breath as mighty China and ancient India. And yet, most people today have never heard of it. No standing temples, no marble ruins, no grand armies carved in stone. Just a name, Srivijaya, a forgotten titan of Southeast Asia. But how does an empire so powerful simply disappear? And what secrets lie beneath the jungles and waters of Indonesia? Let's uncover the lost story of Srivijaya, the forgotten empire of the East. In the mists of the 7th century, as kingdoms rose and fell across the Asian continent, a new power stirred on the island of Sumatra. Not in the highlands, not deep in the jungles, but on the shores, where rivers met the sea, and where trade met opportunity. This power would come to be known as Srivijaya, a name drawn from Sanskrit, Sri meaning radiant, and Vijaya meaning victory. Together, shining victory. Srivijaya wasn't born of vast armies or great fortresses. It rose not through brutal conquest, but through mastery of something just as powerful, the ocean. Its heart was in Palembang, a port city on the Musi River, perfectly positioned to watch over the Strait of Malacca, a narrow corridor of sea that connects the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. Even today, it is one of the world's busiest shipping routes. Back then, it was the lifeblood of ancient trade. Control that strait, and you control the movement of spices, silk, gold, and ideas. Srivijaya became a thalassocracy, a term you may not hear often, but one that perfectly fits this empire. It means rule over the seas. Unlike empires that sought land and borders, Srivijaya flowed like water, rising with the tide, spreading across coasts, rivers, and harbors. It wasn't a solid mass on a map. It was a network, a web, a fluid constellation of port cities and vassals that paid allegiance not because they were conquered, but because it was wise to do so. They taxed ships. They protected merchants. They offered safe harbor and profitable partnerships. In return, wealth poured in. From China, ships brought porcelain and silk. From India came textiles, spices, and Buddhist scriptures. From Arab traders, glassware, metalwork, and new tales of distant lands. Srivijaya became the beating heart between worlds, a middleman of empires, an unseen force, quietly powerful, guiding the flow of goods and people across half the globe. And unlike the landlocked kingdoms of old, Srivijaya knew how to let the world come to it. They built with wood and palm, lived with the rhythms of tide and moon, and ruled with the gentle certainty of a monsoon wind, predictable, seasonal, but impossible to resist. In a time when maps were myths, and oceans were feared more than revered, Srivijaya cast its net wide and began to shine.
Srivijaya was not a kingdom of walls and armies. It was a kingdom of currents and sails, a master of the sea. Not by building massive fleets of war, but by knowing how to guide the winds of commerce. By the 8th century, Srivijaya had become the undisputed maritime power in Southeast Asia. It extended its influence across the coasts of Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula, and even into parts of Java, Borneo, and what is now southern Thailand and Cambodia. But its true strength wasn't its size. It was the invisible grip it held on the Strait of Malacca, and, later, the Sunda Strait. These narrow waterways were the only passage for ships traveling between the great civilizations of the Indian Ocean and China's Tang Dynasty. And Srivijaya knew this well. Every ship that passed through its waters, every merchant that dared to sail east or west, had to negotiate, pay tribute, or partner with Srivijaya's rulers. It was a system that turned geography into gold. But Srivijaya wasn't a pirate state. It didn't survive by plundering. It thrived by protecting. Merchants were offered safe harbor. Pirates were kept at bay by Srivijaya's patrols, and in return, the kingdom flourished. Palembang became a bustling port city. Warehouses overflowed with goods from 3 continents. Temples and markets stood side by side, spiritual trade meeting material trade. But this empire was more than just a toll booth on the sea. It was a cultural broker. Ships didn't just carry goods. They carried languages, beliefs, books, and monks. And Srivijaya became the translator between worlds. It absorbed Indian art and iconography. It shared Buddhist teachings with travelers heading to China. Its rulers spoke Old Malay, but its inscriptions appeared in Sanskrit. A bridge not just of trade, but of thought. Foreign records speak of Srivijaya in awe. Arab geographers noted its richness. Tang Dynasty officials received its envoys with honor. Chinese monks described it as a land of learning and wealth. It wasn't a place you simply passed by. It was a necessary destination. A kingdom without castles but with influence deep as the ocean floor. So how did Srivijaya maintain control? Not by force alone, but through a clever mix of alliance, marriage, gift-giving, and diplomacy. Smaller kingdoms in the region became tributaries, sending goods, soldiers, or ships in return for protection and partnership. When needed, Srivijaya could project strength. But its real talent lay in making others want to cooperate. By the 9th century, it had become a web of influence, stretching across hundreds of islands and coastal enclaves. A spider's web, not easily seen, but deeply felt. And in that silence, in that control, Srivijaya ruled, without needing to shout, without needing to conquer, just by letting the sea and the world come to it. Trade made Srivijaya rich, but it was ideas, not gold or spices, that shaped its soul. In this vast web of harbors and islands, religion flowed like the tide. From India came Buddhism, carried not by swords, but by sails, and Srivijaya welcomed it with open arms. By the 8th century, it had become the foremost Buddhist kingdom in Southeast Asia. Not just a trading port, but a spiritual lighthouse. The Mahayana tradition flourished here, nurtured by kings who believed in both profit and piety. Srivijaya's rulers were more than merchants. They were patrons of the Dharma, guardians of sacred texts, and hosts to monks from far-off lands. One of the most famous of these travelers was Yi Jing, a Chinese monk who visited in 671 CE. He stayed in Srivijaya for 6 months, studying Sanskrit, copying scriptures, and writing of a kingdom that was both prosperous and profoundly spiritual. He described a place full of monasteries, libraries, and scholars. A peaceful stopover before the long voyage to Nalanda, the great Buddhist university in India. In Yi Jing's words, Srivijaya was not just a waypoint. It was a center of learning in its own right. And what's remarkable is this. A kingdom built on trade also became a sanctuary of thought. Few empires manage both, but Srivijaya was more than just Buddhist. It was cosmopolitan, home to Hindus, animists, travelers from Arabia, India, and even Persia. Its culture was a blend of sea and scripture, markets and mantras, boats and blessings. Languages mingled in the ports: Old Malay, Sanskrit, Tamil, and Chinese. Scripts were carved in stone, but also written on palm leaves and bark. Ceremonies mixed Indian rituals with island traditions. Srivijaya was a melting pot without walls, a mirror of the ocean it ruled. Always shifting, always connected, always flowing. Even its architecture reflected this blend. Unlike Angkor or Borobudur, Srivijaya built mostly with wood and brick, not stone. Its temples rose near the riverbanks. Its monasteries stood on stilts, close to the mangroves. Many have been lost, swallowed by jungle and time. But what remains? Fragments, statues, inscriptions, tells of an empire deeply rooted in belief. Here, religion was not just practiced, it was exported. Srivijayan monks carried the teachings to Java, Thailand, even China. It became a bridge, not just of goods, but of spiritual knowledge, a sacred stop between worlds. So when ships left Palembang, they didn't just carry spices, they carried sutras, philosophy, and the echoes of chants spoken in dozens of tongues. In this kingdom where ocean met prayer, where traders and monks dined together, where ports smelled of both incense and pepper, Srivijaya became something rare, a golden crossroads. Empires rise, empires fall, but few fade as quietly as Srivijaya. For centuries, it ruled the seas without rival. It welcomed pilgrims, protected merchants, shaped beliefs. And then it vanished. No dramatic collapse, no final battle etched in legend. Just silence. By the early 11th century, cracks had begun to form. The kingdom was still wealthy, still respected. But beneath the surface, trouble brewed. Trade patterns were shifting. New ports began to rise in Java and the Malay Peninsula. And Srivijaya's grip on the seas was no longer absolute. Then came the storm. In the year 1025 CE, the powerful Chola Empire of southern India launched a devastating naval raid. Led by King Rajaraja Chola III, their fleet crossed the Bay of Bengal and struck Srivijayan territory with surgical precision. Temples were looted. Ports burned. Palembang was sacked. The Cholas weren't interested in conquest. They wanted to break Srivijaya's monopoly on trade. And they succeeded. Though Srivijaya survived the blow, it was weakened. Its vassals grew restless. Alliances crumbled. and the maritime world it once dominated began to move on. Over the next 2 centuries, the kingdom's influence eroded. It faced pressure from rising powers, first from Java's Singhasari and Majapahit, then from Islamic sultanates on the Malay Peninsula. One by one, its ports were taken. Its ships grew fewer. Its voice faded. And unlike empires that left behind grand temples and towering stone cities, Srivijaya left little behind. Its temples, made of wood, decayed. Its inscriptions were scattered. Its cities were swallowed by river, forest, and time. Palembang, once a jewel of the seas, became a quiet town. The rhythms of empire gave way to the silence of memory. By the 14th century, Srivijaya had all but disappeared from regional politics. Even its name began to vanish from local records. The only clues that remained were scattered in foreign texts. Chinese logs, Arab travelogues, Indian inscriptions. To the locals, the empire was no longer a living memory. It had become a ghost beneath their feet. And so, Srivijaya became a riddle, a mighty empire that once ruled the waves. Now forgotten, buried beneath mud and mangrove, its story fragmented like broken pottery in the riverbed. How does a kingdom vanish so completely? Perhaps that is the nature of sea empires. They do not crumble, they dissolve, like mist at dawn, like foam at the edge of the tide. Gone, but not lost forever. For centuries, Srivijaya slept, not in myth, not in legend, but in silence, its name forgotten in the very lands it once ruled. Its ruins buried under rice paddies, river banks, and time. In Indonesia, few knew of the empire that once made Palembang shine. Local histories moved on. To Majapahit, to Malacca, to new powers and new gods. Srivijaya was a ghost with no temple, a memory without a monument, but far from the islands. In old Chinese court records, in scattered Sanskrit inscriptions, in dusty Arabic manuscripts, the clues remained. Enter the 20th century. A French scholar named Georges Cadès sat among scrolls and stones, puzzling over names in ancient scripts, Shilifoshi, Sanfoki, unknown kingdoms referenced by Chinese dynasties, and a mysterious power that once sent embassies across Asia. He connected the dots. Across centuries, across seas. And then, like a fog lifting from the strait, he named the lost empire. Srivijaya. Suddenly, scattered findings made sense. An inscription in Sumatra, a Chinese monk's journal from 671 CE, a bronze Buddha statue in Thailand. All spoke of one kingdom, hidden in plain sight. Excavations began near Palembang. What they found was not grandeur, but fragments, broken bricks, canals choked with mud, stone foundations beneath village roads, ceramic shards from India, Persia, and China. A commercial and spiritual capital now reduced to puzzle pieces, quietly sleeping beneath tropical soil. Archaeologists found no towering ziggurats, no pyramids or castles, because Srivijaya was a kingdom of the water, not the mountain. It lived on rivers, built on wetlands, and faded like mist. But discovery changed everything. Scholars across Southeast Asia began rewriting history books. Maps were redrawn, curricula updated, and the name Srivijaya returned. To museums, to monuments, to national pride. Still, mysteries remain. Where was the exact royal palace? How far did Srivijaya's control truly reach? What language did its people speak at home? Much is still unknown, because Srivijaya did not leave behind a single Angkor Wat or Borobudur. Its memory is scattered, like driftwood on a vast shore. But sometimes what is forgotten is not truly lost. It waits in the mud, in the scroll, in the question that no one thought to ask. And when the tide turns, when the scholar looks closer, history resurfaces just like Srivijaya. Today the empire is gone. Its ships no longer cut across the strait. Its kings are nameless to most. Its temples, lost beneath soil and river. But Srivijaya is not truly lost. Across Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and beyond, its echo remains, in the names of rivers, in the design of ships, in old chants passed from village to village, in the delicate curve of temple roofs in the Sumatran highlands. Srivijaya's legacy is not in ruins. It is in rhythms. It lives in language. Old Malay, once used in inscriptions, is the ancestor of modern Bahasa Indonesia and Malay. It lives in trade. The region's instinct for commerce, for seafaring, for cultural exchange. These are habits centuries in the making. It lives in faith, in the syncretic traditions that mix Hindu, Buddhist, and local animist beliefs, in stories that still speak of golden kingdoms under the sea, and above all, Srivijaya lives in a question. How could something so powerful be forgotten for so long? That question reminds us of something vital. History is not just what is remembered. It is also what we choose not to forget again. In Palembang, monuments now honor Srivijaya. There is a museum, a research center, a growing sense of pride. Archaeologists still search riverbanks. Teachers tell the story once more in schools. Bit by bit, the empire reclaims its name. Not through conquest, but through memory. The tale of Srivijaya challenges how we see empires. It had no great walls, no desert tombs, no legacy carved in marble. Instead, it moved with the tide, whispered across archipelagos, carried in the sails of traders, the chants of monks, the scripts of scholars, an empire that ruled the sea, and then returned to it. So, next time you look at a map of Southeast Asia, trace your finger along the Strait of Malacca, and remember, beneath the surface, history sleeps, and sometimes it wakes.